Hi and welcome to a deck tech video for Tithe Extractor. This is a mid-ranged, combat-orientated mono-black commander. As whenever you attack, target creature gains death touch until end of turn, making it a little bit, let's just say, not so desired to block. As you can send, for example, a 1-1 versus an opponent, and because it gains death touch, they won't block and it will connect. Then it has whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token, then look at the top card of that player's library and exile it face down. You may cast that card for as long as it remained exiled. This means that you have a card draw function or a steal function, as you will be stealing cards from your opponent's libraries. Now you can only steal one card from each opponent, regardless of how many creatures actually connect. If you connect with 2 creatures, it's only going to trigger once per player. So the amount of cards you can steal in each combat cycle is basically 1, 2, 3. Except if you have double strike, you can gain more. Now you can't play lands, but you have to pay colored mana for the things you steal, but as you're gaining treasures, that should solve itself. Now a natural important thing to mention here is that you're not really drawing cards from your own library. Combo decks these days inside this format are usually very consistent because of the high card draw capacity and tutors, meaning that you can find whatever 2 card or 3 card or 1 card combo you have inside your deck and win with it. But this commander doesn't really offer that, as you're drawing cards from your opponent's libraries instead, meaning that you will see a smaller portion from your own deck compared to your opponent's. And because what you're stealing is going to be very random, it's going to be hard to puzzle together a form of combo from your opponents as well. This means that we can already say quite easily that this commander is going to struggle inside this format, because having the ability to win is kind of a key factor inside this game, and having a fast, consistent and reliable combo with some potential even backup for it is usually what's been doing the job. So you're already off to a bad start. However, most opponents are pretty much mirror matchups. They're all playing very much identical cards, and once you get your hand on a form of tutor, you can start to accumulate something. And sometimes exiling random cards from your opponents means that you're ripping apart some of their potential ways to win the game as you're stealing their combos, so that's kinda cool. But in order for you to actually win the game, you have to make it into a long game. And that's where stacks is basically the answer. As mono black can't play counterspells, as well as mono black being pretty much only good at killing creatures, you have to have stacks cards from mono black that it can somehow interact with spellslinger decks. In other words, you're just going to play any form of mono black stacks card you can get your hands on, or any artifact stacks for that matter as well. Here I would love to recommend Dampening Sphere, being one of the better anti-storm cards, as most opponents are usually winning the game by casting multiple spells in the same turn. I would also like to recommend Wandering Archaic. Wandering Archaic isn't usually viewed as a stacks card. Wandering Archaic is usually viewed as a variant to Rhystic Study. But the Wandering Archaic is actually really good at interacting in counterspell wars, as well as just being obnoxious in general. You're going to need Opposition Agent for anti-search, Daffy Voidwalker for anti-graveyard, Orcish Bowmaster for anti-card draw, and anti-creatures, Sholdred for more anti-card draw, Lodestone Golem for anti-spellcasting, Vexian Bubble also for anti-spellcasting. So we got the stacks part covered, and we got why we need to play stacks, and we also got the card part covered of how we're basically going to win the game. We're going to outvalue our opponents by making the game long and just having better value than everyone else. Potentially, hopefully, if everything goes according to plan. But this should start to raise the question of, should we start to include a bunch of creatures that are unblockable? For example, Changeling Outcast. I'm not personally against it, but I don't think so. I haven't included it in my build. The reason is actually quite simple. It doesn't do anything besides being an unblockable 1-1. And in general, inside this format, people don't really have that many blockers, or well, it can depend from metagame to metagame. But you can solve this problem by basically having spot removal in forms of Snuff Out, Deadly Rollick, Dismember, Flare of Malice, Force of Despair, Fatal Push. You get the idea. With a lot of these mono black spot removals, you have a high density of cards that will remove blockers, meaning you will be able to connect with your creatures that are stacks creatures, don't have to play these unblockable creatures, but you will also be able to interact with creature combos as well. Snuff Out can both remove a Hermit Druid and a blocker, while Changeling Outcast can only be unblockable. This takes us to the next discussion, surviving your opponent's resentment. You see, a big problem inside this format for all stacks decks, more or less, is that your opponents eventually get tired of you and try to get rid of you. Even though you aren't really usually the one threatening to win fastest, people are usually going to interact with you the most, because you're annoying or you're preventing opponents from basically winning the match. And you are going to be set back to the Stone Age by cards like Cyclonic Rift, Meltdown that might destroy all your artifacts, Toxic Deluge and other creature board wipes. So even though you want to play a lot of creatures to make sure you're getting a lot of triggers with your commander, it might actually be recommended to spread out and diversify your permanent types. You might need to play a lot of lands, because when Cycrift happens, and it will happen, at least your lands stays around. The same thing goes for enchantments when all creatures are dying to a blasphemous act, or artifacts for that matter too. But it's also really good with a very low CMC mana curve and in general a pretty good card draw capacity in general as well from the deck. Because when you need to rebuild, it's usually good that you have a lot of cards in your hand and a lot of really cheap cards so that you can unload your hand and fill your board state back to its original form, or something of its original form, in just something of one turn cycle. So I highly recommend staying away from expensive cards and try and go as low to the ground as you possibly can. There is a very good reason for this, and that's because eventually you're going to steal someone's Adnas as well. By the way, I would also like to recommend only playing a basic swamp and a snow-covered basic swamp, those being the only basic lands possible inside the entire deck. Because one day you're going to steal a Tainted Pact, and by the way, I recommend playing Tainted Pact in the deck as well. Let's get back to the topic of card draw. As I mentioned, having a lot of lands might be key because you want to go the distance, you can't play lands with your commander, and you want to drag out the game quite long potentially. And lands with a card drawing ability could be quite key. It's like having a Thrasius potentially. For example, the mono-black land Castle Lochwain. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a swamp. Now I did mention that we're not gonna play that many swamps because of the potential of Tainted Pact, so in some cases this might be a land that comes into play tapped. But it's 3 mana, tap it, draw a card, lose life equal to the number of cards in your hand. And honestly, that's fine. Like, you're gonna lose a few cards life, but your hand size is usually gonna be quite low, so it should work out okay. Then we have the land for Mori Vault. 3 mana, tap it, discard a card, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of artifacts you control, put one of them into your hand, and the rest in the bottom of your library in random order. Now you're not going plus minus plus a card because you're going plus minus one card have to be discarded, but you're still digging through your library. The land War Room. 3 mana, tap it, pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color identity, which is going to be just black, so 1 life, and then draw a card, which is perfect. Same amount of mana for a Thrasius activation basic. We have the land Fountain Pour. 2 mana, tap it, sacrifice a token. Your commander is generating treasures, so that part is already solved, and then draw a card. The land Horizon of Progress. You can cycle this land to draw a card for 1 mana, but the big part here is 3 mana, tap it, you may put a land card from your hand into the battlefield tapped. It's going to basically expand you, so if you have more lands in your hand than you're able to use, and you have more mana over, then you can increase your board state of lands. Now if you want to take a look card by card exactly how I put this deck list together, then as always link in the description below of this video to a Moxfield deck list. As a finalized word, I still think that this is a commander that is basically going to struggle. It could win a game here and there. It looks like a really fun commander as you're stealing cards from your opponents, and each game will definitely be unique. In any case, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. See you in the next one.